All right, everybody, welcome to another fantastic episode of Out of This World podcast. I'm your host, Matthew J. Haas. As always, guys, try to subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's where everything is live. Watch live, chat live. If you want to ask the guests questions, that's where to go is YouTube. It's Out of This World podcast show. That's what you look up on YouTube. Or you can go on our Facebook page, Out of This World podcast show on Facebook, and you can get all the information and tidbits of each guest every week. That I try to have a really intriguing guest, interesting guest every week I try. Guys, again, as always, you can listen to the show anywhere available, where you get your podcasts. You can get it on Spotify, YouTube, Rumble, Amazon, iHeartRadio, all those great things. So if you missed the show live, it's no problem. You can catch it at any time on those outlets, on those platforms. Thank you to that. We are up to 40 subscribers, guys, so I want to just quick shout out to everybody who have subscribed to us. That's great for a short period of time already. Just really appreciate that. Real quick, before we get into introducing our guest here, so we have author and historian Bill Bleyer. He wrote a few books, quite a few books. He worked for Newsday. He was a prize-winning staff reporter for Newsday, the Long Island daily newspaper, for 33 years before he retired in 2014. He wrote books and freelance for the newspaper and magazine, and he's the co-author with Harrison Hunt of Long Island and the Civil War. He also wrote Long Island and the Sea, and also George Washington's Long Island Spiring, a history and tour guide, which is a really cool book. So I want to go ahead and get Bill in here now. We're just going to get rolling here. So here's the interview. Seeing I got here. Bill, can you hear me okay? Welcome to the show. How you doing?
I'm good, Matt. Thank you for having me.
All right, great. Everything looks good. Guys, in the chat, if you are chatting with the show, let us know how we sound, how we look, because we can't do exactly live. If we do that live, we're going to look and sound terrible. So you get a lot of bad reverb and all that information. You don't want to hear that during the live show because it'll sound terrible. Let us know what you hear, what you see. That'd be great. Send me a message. You can also email me at ootwpodcastshow@gmail.com. So, without further ado, we want to welcome Bill to the show. Bill, how you doing? How are you?
I'm good, thanks, Matt.
All right, good. All right, and we have somebody in the. No problem, though. That's fine. We have somebody in our chat right here. We have CB. He says you both look great. Thank you. I appreciate it. Welcome to Out of This World podcast, audience and listeners and followers, with Bill Bleyer, author and historian. Long Island has a lot of cool history. Like people think of Long Island, they think of winery. They think of all the, Nassau County, Suffolk County. Uh-oh, hang on. Yeah, we can't have guests come in. Sorry, I have to stop you. Stop video. There we go. Sorry, guys. We'll take questions. Sorry about that, everybody. We'll take questions later in the show. Just throw it in the chat or throw it in the comment in YouTube, and we'll take questions. So I apologize to the audience for that. Anyways, guys, Long Island. Again, I was getting at. You think of wineries. Believe it or not, Long Island had a big part of whaling history, maritime history, had a big part in the Revolutionary War. Everybody, I'm sure, has heard of the Copper Spiring. That had a big factor in the Revolutionary War. If you ever seen the show Turn, it was a great TV show. However, it was not factual as far as any of the things that took place during the show. It was a great show, but the only thing accurate was like the characters and maybe a few things here and there, but it was loosely based off of...
Not even the characters, actually.
Yeah, no, you're right.
I spent a lot of time in my Long Island, George Washington's Long Island Spy Ring, sort of tearing turn apart. It's a good drama, but the producers at AMC commissioned Alexander Rose, who wrote a very the first really serious thick book on the Spy Ring. They hired him. They bought the rights. They hired him as their historical consultant, and then ignored most of the history and his advice. I actually interviewed him when the series debuted on AMC, and our TV critic, talked about the show, praised it for its drama and how captivating it was. And I wrote a sidebar story saying how terrible their history was. and armchair historians on Long Island who have followed the Spy Ring, we have a list that's several pages long of all the factual errors in the series.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, 100%. But that's why we have Bill here. Bill's going to enlighten us with all that. So, before we get into we're going to dive deep into the Spy Ring and the, maritime history and all that. But tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, how you got started, and how your journey began.
I grew up in Little Neck in Queens, and the summer house in Bayville where I live now. I loved history as long as I can remember. I was kind of a young, precocious reader, so I blew through comic books. I blew through the Hardy Boys, and then my father showed up one day. Random House put out this series called Landmark Books, which were serious history books aimed at juvenile readers, done by famous important historians like Bruce Catt and McCanley Kinter. So, if I was homesick, my father would come home from work and bring me one, while I was stuck in bed. So I always loved history, and I actually, when I graduated in 6th grade, I got a Queens County History Award from the American Legion, because even at that age, I was like a sort of a great history buff. So I read National Geographic and anything I could find my hands on history-wise, and bugged my parents when I was young to take me to Gettysburg and Williamsburg and Philadelphia, any place with an important historical story. So I always loved reading history. Was always disappointed in school because they would shortchange history, or they would give you the rote answer. There were 4 causes of the Civil War, not 5, not 3. And I kept waiting for 11th grade when we did American history so we could talk about the Civil War. And we did it like one day. Basically, they taught you what was on the Regents exam.
Right.
Factual stuff, no discussion, no fuzziness at all. And I was like disappointed. So I'd be bored in history class, and then I'd go home and read history, on my own time. Always did that, and thought about being a history major at Hofstra. And my mother always said, "Well, what are you going to do with it? Do you want to be a history teacher?" And I said, "Not particularly. Never thought about writing history." The irony is now I've taught history at Webb Institute, the Naval Architecture College in Glen Cove, and I wrote history for Newsday, wrote 7 books as of next week. My book on the Roosevelts in New York City will be out, and working on book 8.
Nice.
So you never know how your life and your career is going to turn out, but I literally can't remember far enough back not to know when I was interested in history.
Yeah, that's great. And it's funny you brought up that whole thing about, back in school and everything, because I kind of felt the same way. Like, the textbooks can only, teach you so much, and what you learn in school is, just kind of, mainstream. They don't really get into, the details of each, time period of history as far as American history goes. And then you have to write an essay on, the little tidbits they give you, which I thought were, terrible.
And it wasn't so much that, I know they don't have unlimited time to get into the depth of things.
Yeah.
What really bothered me was the lack of nuance.
Right.
Like I said, they talked about the Civil War, and they said, okay, here's the 4 causes.
Yeah.
And you'd raise your hand and say, but what about this? And they'd say, well, we don't have time for that, and move on, So it was so black and white.
Yeah.
Even in 11th grade, I realized it was really sort of glossed over. So it wasn't until I got to Hofstra and took some history courses where the professors would, open to discussion. They'd love it when you argued with them. I blossomed. So I sort of, sleepwalked through high school and then got to college, and all of a sudden, I just really took off. And,
Yeah. Yeah. I actually, for those who are new to this podcast, and yourself, Bill, actually, which I'm sure, well, we're connected on Facebook, so I'm sure you dabbled a little bit into my profile, but I'm a paranormal investigator, and being a paranormal investigator, I've actually learned more about the history of places than I did when I was actually in school, because you hear more about the stories and, the hands-on, more one-on-one stories that you don't hear in textbooks. When you go to these when you go in person, and when you go in person to these places that have so much history, you learn a lot more.
Yeah, well, hands-on history is always the best.
Yeah.
Going, museum houses and reenactments and things, it just really brings it out.
Yeah, definitely, I totally agree. So before we get into our topic heavily here, I want to go ahead and go to this first slide here. That's your slide. I want to get a little bit into George Washington. If you don't know about George Washington, you should. There was a big part of history in high school and in school. Everybody should have learned about George Washington, but for those who haven't or was never interested, George Washington was the founding father and the first president of the United States, serving from 1789 to 1797 as commander of the Continental Army. Washington led Patriot forces to victory in American Revolutionary War against the British Empire. Okay, the Culper Spiring was between 1778 and 1783. The key figures and figures of people that were part of the Spiring, the main characters were Abraham Woodhull, Robert Townsend, Caleb Brewster, and Anna Strong. Those are the key players that were involved with the Culper Spiring. So, do I have that all correct, Bill, so far?
Actually, no, because Anna Strong, there's all kinds of myths, legends, and outright fabrications connected to the spy ring. When I decided to do the book, and I did, my editor wanted me to come up with a spy ring book because Turn was so popular, first on AMC and then on Netflix. He said, "Can't you come up with a book?" And I said, "Well, it's been done well by Alexander Rose. It's been done extremely badly by Brian Kilmeade from Fox News, and everything in between." But I said, I'm not really sure what I could say that wasn't already said. And then I had the idea of doing, an analytical history where I sort of looked at everything that had been said about the spy ring by other authors and magazines on Turn, and picking through that and saying, okay, this is real, this is a myth, this is ridiculously outrageous fabrication. So my book is unique in that way, where I take the whole story from the beginning, going back to Morton Pennypacker in the 40s, where he figured out who was in the spy ring and how it worked, and then discovered in my research that a lot of his stuff was anecdotal or just totally made up also. A lot of that was picked up for Turn. Even more was picked up by Brian Kilmeade and his bestseller, The Secret Six. And and the biggest myth of all with the spy ring is the role of Anna Strong. And it's really funny. In Turn, you're introduced to her right on. Anna Strong is sort of the Martha Washington of Long Island. She and her husband were like the richest people on the North Shore of Long Island. And when you meet her in Turn, she's in a local tavern serving drinks to the local, farmers and farmhands, which is like Martha Washington going to the local bar, to be a barmaid. So right off the bat, Turn is sort of, diverged from the real story. But the most famous, well-known story in the spy ring is that Anna Strong alerted Abraham Woodhull, the chief spy on Long Island, when Caleb Brewster had come across the Sound to either bring or pick up messages for George Washington, that she would put a petticoat on her clothesline with up to five handkerchiefs, signaling to Abraham Woodhull across the harbor where Caleb Smith was hiding to meet him. It's a great story, and it's conceivable, but there's no proof it ever happened. And then the historian at the Phillips Row House, which was connected to the spy ring out in Port Jeff, did some research and found we knew that Anna's husband was in Connecticut because he was a wanted man, and that she stayed on Long Island with their 6 children. And the presumption was she stayed on Strong's Neck across the harbor from Abraham Woodhull so they could communicate. There's no proof in any documentation they ever did that. She could have ridden around the shore on a horse, had somebody row her across the harbor in a rowboat to communicate with Woodhull. But not only is there no proof that it happened, and then the historian out of the Phillips Row House found documentation that Anna Strong, when she was living by herself, lived at other property the family owned further east out in what's now Mount Sinai, which means she wasn't even in the physical position to signal with her laundry. So it's a great story, but it's picked up as fact by many historians. It's in turn, and it's total BS.
Well, that's why we have Bill here on the show, because he's here to give us an education in the spy ring. So if I do have anything that's incorrect, he's gonna correct me on it. So I feel like I'm in school, and he's my history teacher, and he's gonna he's gonna give me a grade at the end of the show. All right. If you guys actually want to visit Woodhull's grave, I went there myself. Believe it or not, these are pictures that I took when I went to visit the cemetery. It's the Presbyterian Church in Setauket. He's buried there, and a couple of others. There's Brewster family there, I believe, also. Is that correct, Bill?
Yeah, there are Brewsters. Woodhull's Brewsters are very prominent names out that way. Caleb Brewster, who's the most famous Brewster in terms of being the chief cross-town courier, he after the war lived up in Connecticut. He's buried up there in Fairfield.
Yeah. What about the Townsend? Is Townsend there too as well? Because I'm not sure about that.
He's buried in Oyster Bay, where the family house in Raynham Hall is now a museum that you can visit.
Yeah,
where they tell the story of the spy ring.
Right. Yeah, I have that here in this slide right here. It's a picture of Raynham Hall.
Another one of the myths is that Robert Townsend was actively spying out of Raynham Hall, which is not true because he was living in the city as the chief spy in the city. Another rumor myth that's out there. And it's even on the historical marker out in front of Raynham Hall, which I've been trying to get them to change, is that Robert's younger sister, Sally, uncovered the Benedict Arnold spy plot because John Andre, the head of British intelligence, did stay at the house. And the fabricated story is that Sally overheard her Andre talking about Arnold wanting to switch sides. She gets word to her brother in the city, and that's how they uncover the Benedict Arnold's plan to turn over West Point to the British, and that's how Andre gets caught. No proof whatsoever, and the only proof that we have that we know it's not true is Andre was at Raynham Hall, documented by letters he wrote from there to friends, a full year before Arnold even thought about changing sides. So it's a lot of examples of people just taking a little snippet of fact and then going wild with speculation. There's rumors that people have written that Townsend, had a mistress and had an illegitimate son. That there was a female spy, Agent 365, who never existed, but in many of the accounts in Brian Kilmeade's book, among others, this Agent 355 not only existed, but had an illegitimate child with Robert Townsend, and then she ends up dying on a British prison hulk. But there's no proof that this woman ever existed. There's only one reference in any of the surviving spy letters to any woman whatsoever, and it's written not by Townsend, but it's written by Woodhull and Setauket to Washington, saying that thanks to a woman who's just identified by that generic code number, that he plans to have with the British, and that's the only known fact of any woman involvement whatsoever. We know Anna Strong knew all these players and helped them, but she was never a spy. She would travel with Woodhull sometimes to the city to give him cover, but she never gathered any information herself. There's no proof that there was ever a spy in the city. it's just amazing how much stuff is spun out of thin air.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, because it's like the stories get passed down over the years and then changes hand, quite a bit. And is Row Tavern was that a real tavern that was in the story?
Yeah, Row Tavern is a real place. Austin Row, who owned it, was the chief on land courier for the spy ring. There were many people riding back and forth carrying messages from towns, and initially Woodhull would go into the city, and then it became too dangerous. So he recruited Townsend, who he met in the city. So various riders would go back and forth. Most of them were not particularly reliable, except Austin Row, who did it for the whole war. He owned Row Tavern in Setauket, and the building used to be on North Country Road 25A. It was bought in the 1920s by a writer who wanted more privacy and quiet, so he had it moved to a nearby private street and put on two wings to it. But George Washington, when he did his 1790 tour, stayed at the house. He went along the South Shore to Patchogue, went north to Setauket, and then worked west to Oyster Bay and Flushing and back to the city, and stayed at Austin Row's Tavern. And a lot of historians and others say that Washington stayed at Austin Row's Tavern to thank Austin Row for being a member of the spy ring. That's another myth, because Washington wanted to know initially who the members of the spy ring, and actually bring Woodhull to headquarters north of New York to talk strategy. Woodhull and Benjamin Talmadge, that is spy ring, talked Washington out of it. They said, there are spies in your headquarters.
Yeah.
If we bring Woodhull here, who was only known by his codename Culper Senior, his identity will probably be known to the British, and the whole spy ring will get rolled up and hanged. So Washington said, okay, I agree, it makes sense. I don't ever want to know who's involved except Talmadge. And then even when Washington stayed at Row's Tavern, Row had business interest in Patchogue. He was in Patchogue the night Washington stayed there and didn't realize Washington was there. Washington heads north to his tavern. Row finds out about it, gets on his horse, gallops north to get ready to host the president. He never had any problems riding 55 miles back and forth between Setauket and New York during the war, but on that day he's galloping north, gets thrown from his horse and breaks his leg. As best we can determine, he went back to have a doctor set it in Patchogue, never got to his tavern, never encountered Washington. And Washington, in his private diary, talked about every place he went, what he ate, people he met, what the farmers were doing, the soil conditions, and doesn't mention Austin Row. He says he met very nice people at night at Row Tavern, but he never mentions that he met Austin Row. And even if he was trying to protect the spy ring's identity after the war, and they never really talked about it even after the war, in his own personal diary, not for publication, he would have mentioned Austin Row, but didn't. So, it's just a myth after a myth.
Yeah, no, totally, I get you. What about the church in Setauket? Was that actually a location that the British had seized, and they were stationed there, and did any skirmishes take place there, or no?
The British went out of their way to make life difficult for Presbyterians and Quakers, who were considered disloyal and supporters of the Revolution. The church is affiliated with the Church of England, is where the British officers would go to church.
Yeah.
And they would protect those churches. But the church out in Setauket, they turned it into a fort. Around Long Island, they would turn Quaker meeting houses and Presbyterian churches into stables, or storage houses. Whatever they would do, they would strip them of wood to build fires or build other shelters. But they did build a fort out of the church out there, and the Americans came across in one of their multiple whaleboat raids to attack Setauket. They brought a cannon along, set it up out at a big rock just west of town that you can still see there, and attacked. But the British had fortified the church so well that they drove the Americans away. But there's still like a bullet hole you can see if you go up the stairs to the steeple.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah.
What I should do a shout out to Beverly Tyler, who is the historian for the Three Village Historical Society. He was one of my primary sources for my book.
Nice.
And he does great tours for the Historical Society, walking tours around Setauket. So anybody who wants to go out there and get the real story,
Yeah.
I encourage you to go to the Three Village Historical Society where they have exhibits, and then sign up for one of Bev Tyler's tours.
Yeah, I was going to mention that because do they still do that? They still do the coal perspiring tours?
Yeah, there's commercial ones as well, but my sense is, from what I've heard of some of them, they tend to embellish, and pick up some of the rumor as fact. Bev Tyler is the gospel, so I recommend people track him down and take one of his tours.
Right, right. Yeah. Now, another interesting tidbit, that, I mean, it has a little bit to do with what we're talking about, but I had visited the historic cemetery in Huntington, and I believe there was a little bit of information regarding the British being there before the cemetery. There was like possibly Native American burials there, and they fortified that area, and I believe also put a cannon up on the hill because it's a very big hill, and you can oversee a lot of things in that cemetery. How much of that is true?
The British occupied all of Long Island after the Battle of Long Island in 1776 in August, and they would have varying amounts of troops here depending. Basically, they wanted Long Island for the supplies it could provide to the British Army in New York. They wanted the grain, the timber, forage for their horses. So depending on how active the Continental Army folks were coming over from Connecticut to raid, the British would bring more or less troops to Long Island, basically to keep the Americans from coming across the Sound and doing raids. And towards the end of the war, as the war shifted south down to Virginia, Long Island and even New York became less important. But in the last year of the war, the British reinforced their contingent in Huntington and built a fort on the hill where the cemetery is, right behind East Main Street, where the Soldiers and Sailors Monument is. And there was a Presbyterian church there, so they basically trashed it, stripped it, and the parsonage, of wood to build shelters for the soldiers. They used tombstones for cooking or part of their huts. Basically trashed the whole area up there, even though the war was essentially over already. So there was a lot of ill will about the British occupation, and by the end of the war, even among the loyalists who supported the British, because the British initially had trouble figuring out who was loyal and who wasn't, and then ended up treating everybody badly. So even the loyalists became disgusted with the British by the end of the war.
Yeah, no, totally. That's freaking awesome about the Huntington thing. I was there not long ago, I believe last year, and you can actually see. Bill, I'm sure you've been there, but there's a spot where I think the cannon used to sit. And there's like a circular kind of cement area and what looks like it used to be mounted on. I'm not sure if that was for the cannon or if that was for some other structure possibly, but
I'm not sure. I mean, any remnants of the fort are long gone.
Yeah.
The cemetery remains. But anything the British built, would have been taken away for some other use or turned to dust, by now.
Right. Yeah, it's really.
If people go out there, if the Robert used the Huntington historian in his office in the Soldiers and Sailors Monument. If you go in and chat with him, you'll learn a lot about what happened during the war.
Yeah, it's a really cool cemetery. I mean, it's very historic. They do a good job with the grounds there, and it's very beautiful, like scenery when you're up top on the hill and you look over, some of Main Street and all that there. Very scenic. I like it there. It's peaceful.
Yeah, what people generally people tend to overlook when they're in that area is there's two monuments to Nathan Hale in Huntington. One of them is a cylindrical monument right there on East Main Street at the base of the hill. The other one is the big boulder with the plaque up on the hillside. Near where he landed.
Yeah, definitely. The Townsend Inn Manor that's out east, is that in any relation to the same family of the Townsend family, Robert Townsend, any of them, or is that a different,
probably different branch of the family. The Oyster Bay Townsends were pretty much confined to that Oyster Bay area. They were the
Yeah.
Samuel Townsend was the richest man in town with a
Yeah.
big trading empire.
Gotcha.
A lot of cousins and relatives, scattered around Oyster Bay. But when you get further than that, it's not really the same family.
Yeah. Yeah. And Wood Abraham Woodhill's farm, which obviously does not exist anymore. But any remnants of the farm still left?
The farmhouse is actually lasted, I think, until I'm trying to remember the date. But I think, if I recall, it was in the 1950s.
Oh, wow.
Then it was burned. I don't know if it was arson or just an accidental fire.
Yeah.
If you go by the property, there's a blue and gold historical marker saying this was Abraham Woodhill's farm. Talmadge's father was a minister in Setauket, so he grew up in the parsonage, and that still exists out there by the church.
Nice.
And there's markers for that as well.
Yeah, that was going to be one of my next questions. Is like what still remains, like as far as structures or houses and buildings that were used during the spiring. Like, is there a large amount or very little?
Not so much. There's a plan by Suffolk County and Brookhaven officials to acquire the original Road Tavern, take the two modern wings off and move it back out to North Country Road. They've acquired a property across from the original site on the south side of the road, and they want to move it there, restore it to be a historic house museum, which would be great because now it's a private house, you can't get in it. But if you go look at it, which I did, you can see the bedroom on the second floor where George Washington stayed during the 1790 tour. There's other colonial era buildings all over Setauket, but none of them really have any kind of direct tie to the spiring, other than the Talmadge parsonage. But there is the church, and there's Patriot Rock, and other things we're looking at. Woodhill's grave.
Right. Which is, like I said, I'm going to show a picture of that again, real quick. I'll bring up that slide. Yeah, I just think it's was very I thought how they put his gravesite and everything was just like very respectable, very very good of them to have that on display like that. Of course, they have the plaque, and the actual headstone that's like right there in front of everything. And again, it's again another historic cemetery there. A lot of notable figures are there. Not just Woodhull or Brewster. There's other prominent figures that are buried there as well.
Yeah, and if people go out that way, I'd recommend they go to the Phillips Row House in Port Jefferson, which has been turned into a real museum with a respected historian running it. Raynham Hall is really interesting. So there are places you could go to pick up on the spiring.
Yeah, no, definitely. Other than your book that I recommend a lot, are there any other books that like kind of are more accurate as far as regarding historical facts regarding the spiring that you would recommend?
Alexander Rose's Washington Spies is the most comprehensive. He's got a lot more information than I do. There's a couple of things that I quibble with him, some of his conclusions about Anna Strong kind of things. But it's, that's sort of the Bible for most researchers. And then it goes downhill pretty quickly into legends and, one guy who used to work for the CIA did an article about the spiring, and he talked about not only did he repeat the Anna Strong story, but he had Talmadge in Connecticut looking at the underwear and the handkerchiefs on the spy thing from Connecticut, which, if you know anything about the geography of Long Island and the geography of the world, is impossible because the curvature of the Earth, plus the big sandbar at the entrance to Port Jeff Harbor, plus the high hill with trees in Setauket would make that physically impossible. So a lot of people haven't done their homework. So the only other book that I tell people to read if they want more information than mine is Alexander Rose's book. Everything else you're you're getting into historical fiction.
Yeah, no, I agree. So you also wrote a book about the Long Island Sea, maritime history. I know Long Island had a big part in whaling history. There's the whaling museum out east. I believe it's in Sag Harbor, that area. I've been out there. I haven't been to that museum, believe it or not, my whole life. I've been wanting to go. I just never got around to it. But I plan to go. It's on my bucket list. I do plan to go one day. But
I'll be actually lecturing out there, I think, in the fall.
Oh, really? Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah.
It's a great museum, as is the Cold Spring Harbor Whaling Museum.
Yeah.
They have lots of interesting exhibits and
Yeah.
artifacts, which I recommend both of them.
Yeah. When did?
What most people don't realize is whaling in America started in Long Island in Southampton,
Yes.
right in the earliest days of the colonial period in the 1640s.
Yeah.
Because when the English settlers showed up in 1640, the Native Americans out there, the Montaukets and the Shinnecocks, were already whaling, and when the colonists showed up, they realized the economic potential of whaling. Most of them couldn't swim. Most of them would scared to death to be out on the ocean in the winter when the whales showed up. So they basically hired the Native Americans to whale for them. But the first whaling operation, the first whaling company chartered in America, well, that's in Southampton.
Nice.
It spread to East Hampton and other ports like Greenport, Cold Spring Harbor. But the places that people think of whaling in America, like New Bedford and Nantucket, they actually learned how to whale from the people on Long Island.
Wow. So I didn't know that.
We're not only the cradle of Asian, we're the cradle of whaling.
Nice. And they killed whales for oil, like way before the drilling days started. Like they would kill the whales for mostly oil, right?
Yeah, they would basically, they would boil the whale blubber down to make whale oil, which burned cleaner and hotter than than paraffin or wax, anything else they could use for illumination. The bones were used for fertilizer. The baleen that some of the whales had, in their mouths, it's the same consistency as your fingernails, but it looks like a drapery, and they would use that for buggy whips, for corsets and things. So pretty much the whole whale would be used for something.
Right.
Which is why they were hunted to almost to extinction.
Yeah. There's another destination that if people haven't gone to, which is another great museum that features a lot of maritime history, is the Seaport Museum in Greenport. I'm sure you've been there.
Yeah, I lecture there too.
Yeah. Yeah, it's another great place. They have a lot of great relics and stuff there.
Yeah, a lot of good lighthouse relics there.
Yeah. Actually, I don't know if you know this, Bill, but we were the paranormal investigators that investigated Bar Bug Lighthouse out there.
Did you find anything?
We did. We found some interesting stuff. We recorded the sound of ghostly footsteps on the deck. I got that on audio on my video camera, and we actually got something really cool because the lighthouse keeper, descendant of the original lighthouse keeper, was actually present with us. His name is Bob Allen, and we used him kind of as a trigger object. Being present, we thought would help facilitate any kind of strange phenomena. But him being there was really cool because we learned a lot about the lighthouse keepers and how they took care of the lighthouse back then. It was just like a really rough lifestyle. Because back then, we didn't have technology like we have, back then. But to keep up the maintenance of lighthouses then was a really tough life.
Bob's an interesting guy. I interviewed him for Newsday a couple times.
Yeah, no, definitely. We heard the story of a dog. The lighthouse keeper had a dog, and the dog his name was Brownie. And so we were like, animals, have souls and they're alive, and if they die, they pass on. So I'm like, let's throw a dog bone. A co-investigator of mine had the idea of putting a bone, actual dog bone, on the second floor. And I'm kind of old school, like paranormal investigating. So I put a string around the bone so that if the bone were to move outside of the string, you would see the string kind of like, get messed with, or it would change, or it would not be in the circle of the string. So
Right.
we heard some noises on the second floor where we had placed that. And so we went to go investigate after we heard the noises. We were nowhere on the second floor. So we went up there, and we literally found the bone outside of the string, like turned like 360 degrees. And there was no way that it wasn't that windy for that to like blow a whole dog bone like out of the circle of the string, because that would have been a pretty good gust of wind.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, so
there's a lot of great paranormal stories around Long Island. I haven't delved with that much.
Yeah,
it's
and
fun to hear the stories.
one of the stories I want to bring up, which I'm sure you're a fan of, if being that you're into maritime history, is Captain Kidd and the story of him possibly burying treasure off of Gardiner's Island.
Yeah, that's a fact. I mean, there's a lot of myths about Long Island history, but that's real.
Yeah.
He basically went to sea. He was a respected New York City sea captain and a privateer, which means he was authorized by the government to capture enemy vessels, which would be French or Spanish. And he goes out to sea, and they stop at Madagascar for water and provisions, and the crew mutinies on him, leaves him and a few loyal officers and men on the beach, and he then captures a ship called the Quitter Merchant, which he decided was an enemy vessel because he needed a vessel. He needed to capture some other vessels to keep his crew happy with sharing the proceeds of their captures. And he probably knew at the time it wasn't really legitimate, but the owners went to the British Crown and complained that the ship had been taken illegally, which led them to declare Kidd a pirate. He decides he's going to go, comes back to New York and back to Long Island, and decides that he's going to go to Boston and see the governor, Lord Belmont, who was actually his business partner when he went to London to get the commission as a privateer, to plead his case. But he hedges his bets. He visits a lawyer in Oyster Bay named James Emmett, to have him go to the governor in Boston to represent him. He has his wife shipped off to Block Island to a friend's house because he's afraid that she'll be arrested as an accomplice. And then he buries some treasure. He gives the treasure to a friend in Jamestown, Rhode Island, and then goes twice to Gardiner's Island to get Jonathan Gardiner, the proprietor, to hide some of the treasure. And he famously has his men dig a hole in the woods inland from the western shoreline, and they bury boxes of treasure. They give Jonathan Gardiner some goodies for his trouble. They give him a big swath of silk, which was very rare and valuable. If you get to go to Gardiner's Island, which I've been able to do, if you go into the manor house, you can see a section of that silk cloth framed on the living room wall. And then later, when Kidd goes to Boston, and rather than being declared not a pirate, he's arrested, sent to London, tried and hanged, both for piracy and for killing one of his mutinying crewmen back in Madagascar. And then the governor sends emissaries to Gardiner's Island. They confront Jonathan Gardiner. They dig up the treasure, take it back to Boston. And the family later puts looks like a tombstone on the site where the hole was. So it's real story and well documented.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you can actually go on, there's a foundation, I believe the Lion Garner Foundation has a lot of that information on there too. There's a lot of Captain Kidd info out there if you want to learn about it. But I just threw in the chat real quick. If you guys heard me typing, I apologize if you hear any of the keyboard. My wife pointed out, she was like, yeah, I can hear you typing. So we'll take a couple of questions if anybody has any. If Bill doesn't mind taking a question or two, like before.
No, it's fine.
Yeah. But yeah, we've been talking about Captain Kidd. We talked about the spiring, some whaling and maritime history. So we're getting a little bit around the world here. What's your favorite part of history, Bill?
Ever since I love military history and maritime history since I was a kid. The first thing that really captivated me was the Civil War, very early on. So I read lots of stuff about the Civil War. Bugged my parents to take me to Gettysburg. A famous story in the family. I was maybe 10 years old, and we did what a lot of people do: is you go to Gettysburg and hire a private car to drive around the battlefield in your car with you. And I ended up getting into arguments with the guide because I had read things that conflicted with what he was telling the family. So my parents thought that was hysterical. The guide was probably not thrilled to have this little kid contradicting him. But I still love the Civil War, which is why I wrote a lot about it. The Long Island connections for Newsday, and then when I decided to leave and write books, that I co-wrote that book with Harrison Hunt, who had done 20 years of research on the Civil War while he was a Nassau County Museum supervisor.
Yeah. We have a comment here in the chat that says from CV, this has been an absolutely fascinating discussion. They majored in history at GW, so they have been enraptured listening. As a resident of Glen Cove, are there any revolutionary landmarks here? Thank you, Caroline Bassett.
There are supposedly, I think, some Revolutionary War soldiers down in the Cedar Swamp cemetery south of the city. But I think, if I recall, I went there looking for them and couldn't find them. But they still might be there. But there's a lot of history. It used to be called Mosquito Cove until somebody realized that's not a great name to bring people to the town. But it had Civil War involvement. There was a gentleman named Nathaniel Coles, who was a commander of a cavalry regiment in the war, who lived down on the south part of the city. It had a lot of Native American history there, which is why the Garvey's Point Museum, is there.
Yeah.
But not a lot happened during the Revolution that I think of.
I work not that far from Glen Cove because I work in Old Westbury, right down the road. I love Glen Cove because there's a lot of I call it Gatsby country because of all the Gold Coast mansions that were on the North Shore of Long Island back during Prohibition period, during the early 1900s, and you had the Gilded Age. You have a lot of big estates that are still left from those time periods. The DuPont family, which was they had a large estate where I worked before it became a college. So I worked for NYIT College, and they had bought 110 acres of the land, and so I can't imagine how many mansions or estates were on the property prior to them building the college there. But from my
you're talking about Pratt Institute?
Yeah.
That was the Pratt family.
Yeah, the Pratt family. Yep.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Webb Institute was the Pratt family.
Yep.
The patriarch built a big mansion, and then he had 5 sons and built them all mansions around the property with a central big hub. That was like the utility center for the whole compound.
Yeah.
But they all 5 of the mansions survived. One is the Russian residence. There's Webb Institute. There's Glen Garriff Nursing Home, Glen Cove Mansion Catering Hall.
Right. Yeah, you have the Vanderbilts had a few of them. It was the Whitney where I worked. They had the Whitney, Vanderbilt, and DuPonts kind of all married into each other, I think. And they all had different estates on the property back then. But Yeah, so the DuPont family, what I was getting at is during World War II or World War One, where the old Westbury Country Club is, the golf course, which is right next to NYIT, there's two tall towers there. If you guys are ever in the area, it's actually really cool to look at because the structure of it is, the architecture of the towers is just amazing. But they used to,
their water tower is really cool.
yeah, it is.
I just passed up there occasionally to look at it.
Yeah, no, but what I didn't know about it was like I was doing my own research and history of where I work, and they used to use the watchtower for during World War II. They used to use it to watch out, for I guess any raids of the area or something to that effect.
Somebody asked about Friends of the Bay there.
Oh, we have another. Yeah. They said, thank you. Would love to hear Bill speak about Friends of the Bay a little, as I am an environmental activist and work in clean drinking water. Go ahead, shoot.
Okay. So when you work for Newsday, they're very strict ethics policies. You can't do anything that Newsday might write about that might be a conflict for them. So when Earth Day came, I was a senior in high school when Earth Day came around in 1970, and was just blown away by the whole, fledgling environmental movement. When I was at Hofstra, I wanted to do, it was an economics major, and I wanted to look at the economics in the environmental movement, which there wasn't much written about it, so I ended up developing a honors thesis, and then they had a special program where I got to actually teach an environmental economics course in my last semester. But once you get to Newsday, you could cover the environment, but you couldn't be involved in anything that they might be writing about. But when I left, you can now do that. So I got involved in. I actually got into journalism because of the environmental movement, because Robert Moses and Governor Rockefeller were trying to build a bridge from Bayville, where I live, up to Rye, and it literally would have gone right through my house. When I was in Hofstra, I was generally doing music reviews and concert reviews, interviews with artists for the school paper, and then one day I just decided they had a news feature page on the back of the paper, and I asked the editor of that page if I could do something about how the bridge would destroy the environment of the North Shore, and she said fine. It was printed in the Hofstra Chronicle, which was printed in the same printing place as the Oyster Bay Guardian, which wrote about the bridge. The Paste-Up people showed the article to the editor of the Guardian. They called me, they wrote a story about me, which led to a summer job, which led me to do a journalism career. So I covered environment from college on and off ever since, but you couldn't get involved. But when I left, people that I knew were trying to fight the Governor Cuomo's idea to build the tunnel across Long Island Sound from the secret Oyster Bay up to Rye, which was better environmentally than the bridge, but still had a lot of negative impacts. So we ended up creating a coalition against an unsound crossing to fight that. We had our first press conference in Syosset, and Governor Cuomo killed the project the next day.
Wow.
After that, the director of Friends of the Bay was one of the founders of this group. So when the tunnel went away, she said, well, why don't you get active in Friends of the Bay, because you have time now. So I said, fine. So I ended up on the board, and then became secretary, and then within a year or so I became president. I think I'm in my 5th year as president. So
nice.
People that don't know the group, its mission is to protect and preserve Oyster Bay and Cold Spring Harbor. We're trying to eliminate pollution. We're trying to bring back the shellfish population, because most people don't realize that oysters are almost extinct now in Oyster Bay.
Really?
Because of overfishing, because of warming water, pollution, parasites, and other things. So it's a great organization, if I say so myself, and anybody out there, whether they live in Oyster Bay or beyond, who likes to get involved, we're always looking for volunteers, looking for sponsors, donors.
Nice.
If you go on the website, all that's spelled out.
Yeah. Well, if you want to share any links with me, Bill, I will surely be glad to stick it in the description on the YouTube channel. So this way, anybody who follows Out of This World podcast and they want to watch this episode and they get your info, I'll put it there under the description, and any links or any information you want me to forward, I can always put that in the description for you, and hopefully you guys will get some get some traffic.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm drawing a blank on our website.
You can
Google it.
Yeah, you can always email it to me. Whatever info that you can pick up.
Yeah.
Just throw it.
I thought it is what I thought. It's friendsofthebay.org. It's
there you go.
Sort of obvious, but I didn't want to give the wrong information.
Yeah, they want to know if you would consider speaking to the North Country Garden Club.
I will speak to anybody that pays me a speaking fee, and I speak to a lot of. I do some lectures. I used to do a lot of free lectures to get my word out there and sell books. And then as I got better known, now I'm doing sometimes. I'm trying to remember. I think I've done 70 lectures in 1 year now, so
wow.
I've sort of cut back on places that don't pay me. But I spoke to yacht clubs, museums, historical societies, assisted living complexes. I'll speak to anybody.
Yeah. No, that's cool.
If anybody wants to reach me with anything about speaking or questions or anything else, can just email me at billbleyer@gmail.com.
Nice. What are the top books you recommend your followers that you've written if they want to learn more about your writing and your publishing? What are your top favorite books that you recommend?
Probably my favorite is Long Island and the Sea, which is my best-selling book and the fattest book, because there have been histories of Long Island Sound. There have been maritime history books about Long Island. Nobody put it all together and did everything, and I wanted it to be literally cover every topic I could think of or anything that people suggested to me. And when I thought I was done, I would do a lecture someplace. I remember I was out at Montauk Library, and the local library history person said, "Oh, great! It's great. Great idea to do the book. You're going to talk about how the Navy had blimps out in Montauk during World War II to look for submarines." And I said, "I never heard of that, but I'll put it in the book." So she sent me information. The book kept getting bigger and bigger, and I had to start trading away pictures to get more writing space, and ultimately. We maxed it out at the biggest book that the history press could put on their presses, and then that was the end. I couldn't go anymore. But it's 30 chapters, all of different subjects, from submarines to World War II, the Revolution, to the Civil War. And I have 12 lectures that I do. Half of them are out of that book because of it's just so much in there. And one of the things I write about in the shipwreck chapter is about the steamboat Lexington, which is the worst maritime disaster in the history of Nassau or Suffolk County, which, despite being a maritime history buff, I never heard about until I was working on Newsday's year-long project called Long Island. I'm getting old.
No worries.
It'll come to me.
Yeah.
This is embarrassing. But we did the history of Long Island every day for a year, and then three books that came out of it, and Long Island, Our Story. And I did all the maritime history, and the editor wanted to do a centerfold on a Sunday of shipwrecks, so I started. Some of them I already knew about, and I'm talking to maritime historians and museums, and somebody mentioned the Lexington, and I never heard of it. Even though all but 4 people on board died in the winter of 1840. And it just fascinated me, and I dealt with it briefly in the book, but I kept coming across more information. And then when COVID came, I just started working on the book that's coming out this week about the Roosevelt family in New York City.
Nice.
And then everything shut down in the city, and I couldn't do any research, so I said to my editor, I got so much information on Lexington, I could turn it into a whole book, which I did. So, that's just a really compelling story. What happened, during the fire and what happened afterwards. So, I mean, that's probably my favorite Long Island history story is the sinking of the Lexington.
Yeah, yeah.
Right now, I'm working with people in Port Jefferson to put up a historical marker by the harbor because the ship caught fire off Eden's Neck and then drifted east and sank out northwest of Port Jefferson.
Okay.
And I tell people if you ever take the Port Jeff to Bridgeport Ferry, you're going right over the wreck.
Yeah. Have you ever heard of this story in the 1800s, real quick? I believe it took place in the 1800s. There was an immigrant ship that had a bunch of immigrants coming from someplace in South America coming up the south shore of Long Island. And in Lynbrook, I heard of this story because we were working with the Lynbrook Historical Society at the time, and we investigated the cemetery over there. Apparently, there was some immigrants that came up on this ship, and there was something happened, and there was, I think, a fire. They all froze on the ship. There was a lot of bodies that were discovered on the ship. It was during some kind of blizzard, and they took the bodies and actually they buried a mass grave somewhere in that cemetery. They don't know the exact location, but that was the story that I was given.
Yeah, this the Lynbrook. It was actually two wrecks, not too far apart. The Mexico and the Bristol. Both coming from England and Liverpool with Irish people fleeing the potato famine in the 1830s, and they both got caught in storms off of New York Harbor. They were trying to get into the harbor, and they were trying to get harbor pilots, but the harbor pilots, in one case, couldn't get out because of ice built up at the entrance to the harbor, and in the other case, because the harbor pilots were having a party in New York City and abandoned their. Usually, there would always be a pilot boat out by Sandy Hook, so both ships were sailing around at night, trying to wait for daylight to see if they could find a harbor pilot, and ended up both running aground on Long Island, breaking up in the storms. Some people were rescued by people on shore, but hundreds of people died. In one case, they were buried right on the beach. Others, the bodies were taken to that cemetery on the Lynbrook-Rockville Center border, and they are buried in mass graves around a monument, so they do know where they are.
Oh, okay.
But there's a monument there, for the victims and the names that they knew of both shipwrecks.
Nice.
But I deal with that in my Long Island in the Sea book too.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, I was wondering if you heard about that because I'm like, you know a lot about maritime history, so I was like, you have to know. So I had to mention it. So
yeah, somebody was asking about TR. I love TR. Everything about him.
Yeah.
I grew up summers and live in Bayville, so Sagamore Hill was a 10-minute ride. I went there a lot starting in childhood. And just loved his personality. He was so much larger than life. And the house reflects him so well. Like you walk in, and you see the elephant tusks and the hippo leg, ashtrays and everything. And kept studying him and learned more and more about him. And, he wasn't perfect, but he was, fascinating, multifaceted individual. And every time I go there, I try to buy a book about Sagamore Hill. There are lots of biographies of Roosevelt, and only one book about Sagamore Hill written by Herman Hagedorn, who was the first director of the Theodore Roosevelt Association back in the 1950s. But unfortunately, his book is not footnoted and has a lot of myths repeated as fact. And he ends the book when TR dies in 1919, doesn't talk about the Roosevelt Association acquiring the house from the Roosevelt family after Edith Roosevelt had lived there for decades after TR died, and obviously doesn't deal with the National Park Service taking over because that happened after he was long gone.
Yeah.
So every time I go, I say, why doesn't anybody write a book about Sagamore Hill?
Yeah.
Most of the national park sites have a book about them. And the curator who I dealt with a lot said, she was going to write one, and then she retired and said she was moving back to Pennsylvania, no longer wanted to write the history of Sagamore Hill, so she said, why don't you write it? So I did.
Nice.
But Yeah, I could talk about TR for hours.
Oh yeah, I know. Well, I know. I wanted to accommodate Bill because we usually do 2 hours of this podcast, but we're going over an hour already. But I don't want to keep him too long. But I do have one more question, Bill, if you don't mind.
Yeah, that's fine. If there's any more questions from the audience,
Yeah,
I can go
yeah.
on a bit.
I have a question for myself regarding TR actually. TR and a John Underhill question. For those who don't know who John Underhill was, he was a captain that was hired, I believe, by the Dutch. I could be wrong. Bill can correct me on that or not. But he came in to clear out any native lands that they wanted to try to negotiate with, or that was having problems getting land from the Native Americans in the area. Now, my question is, and this took place in the 1600s, is like TR kind of painted, and some people painted John Underhill as a hero. And that's why they made a monument of him and the cemetery, the burial ground that he had. But some people don't portray him as a hero because of him, slaying all the Indians of the tri-state area. Because it wasn't just Long Island; it was actually like Connecticut, parts of Westchester, the Hudson Valley, and also Long Island. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, the history has changed and the interpretation. I mean, the people that conquered the West, were all heroes initially, until people start to realize that there were people living here all over North America. When the whites showed up from Europe, and they weren't treated well. And Long Island is a good case. The Montaukets and the Shinnecox and the people, the tribes that were on Long Island were basically pushed out of the way. Land was stolen, basically legally, by the state legislature and land developers. So it's a pretty sorry history. So, I'm a big fan of telling the full story, including like having Confederate monuments around, as long as you explain the history that goes with them.
Yeah.
So, they just took the statue of Theodore Roosevelt away from the front of the Museum of Natural History because it was flanked by a Native American and an African person, and it definitely had an imperialism aura to it. But I don't like to take away the history. I like to explain it. So I mean, I would have preferred to keep the monument there and explain that this reflects the thinking of the time when he was president, and expansionism and imperialism, was widely accepted, done by most of the developed countries of the world.
Yeah.
And it ignores the whole genocide, if you want to say, look it that way.
Yeah.
That came with it.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of historians that wrote about that portion of history called it a massacre. There was like the Indian massacre of the late 1600s. I think it was more like the late 1600s.
Yeah, I mean, TR in a lot of ways was more progressive, and he was definitely progressive, but he was more progressive in his racial, cultural views than others. I mean, he invited Booker T. Washington to have dinner at the White House, which created a furor. Didn't repeat that. He charged up San Juan Hill next to a Buffalo Soldier regiment of black soldiers and credited them in his autobiography and other places, for their valor. But then when some black soldiers basically, riot is not really the right word, but rebelled in Texas because they were, being treated, excluded from things that the white soldiers could do. He allowed them to be court-martialed and dishonorably discharged from the military, which is kind of a black mark on his record. But you got to sort of take him in the context of his times when he did a lot more good than bad. Creating national parks and national monuments.
Yeah.
Pioneering the conservation movement.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of TR fans out there, definitely.
In fact, they're building a TR Presidential Museum and Library as we speak in North Dakota, which is going to open next July 4th.
Nice. So I mean, look, if I remember, my history about TR, he had a lot to do with the state parks and making a lot of the where history took place into state parks. He turned that around and tried to preserve those areas.
Yeah, New York had the first state park system in the country. TR was governor, but he's not really known for that. What he did do is create. He was the one who came up with using the Antiquities Act, which was his version of an executive order to create national forests, national monuments, many of which later became national parks.
Yeah.
But he also. He was the first. He wasn't the first president. To create a national park, granted it with Yellowstone, but he up until I think Jimmy Carter, he created more national parks and monuments than any other president.
Okay. Yeah. No, I just thought I would bring that up because I did a lot of research because of the Amityville horror, which I'm sure everybody's familiar with. So I did a lot of historical research, with John Underhill and the the Indian massacre that took place during the 1600s. So because I think not to bring up a whole nother story or whatever, but I think there's a lot of forgotten history in Amityville and Seaford and Massapequa. That's where all that took place. So that there was a big connection there with Amityville.
Every community on Long Island has interesting history, which is why when we did that Newsday project, we did a book, Hometown Long Island, which is the history of every community on Long Island, and I did a bunch of those community histories, and you'd find all kinds of little tidbits you never knew. Like I think I wrote the Glen Cove one, found out it was called Mosquito Cove, and at one point there was a starch works that took up a huge chunk of land down by the water, and employed thousands of people, and it's I never heard of that. So even the smallest hamlets have interesting history.
Sure. No, absolutely. So we'll end the interview right there. Bill, is there any shout outs? Where can people get all your information, and do you have any events coming up that you would like to share with the audience?
All my books are pretty much at every library on Long Island. Every bookstore has at least some of them. You can get them on Amazon, Walmart.com. They sell them at the big box stores around Long Island. I have as I said, I do 12 different lectures at this point. Soon to be 13. Actually, it'll be 12 with the Roosevelt's in New York lecture that I'm going to start to give. The first lecture on the book is going to be the first Monday in August in the Bayville Library. Then I'm doing the FDR Library up in Hyde Park the next day. I'm doing Hutton House at CW Post.
Oh, nice.
And then, but if people want to know where I am, what I'm talking about, I have an email blast list. So if you email me at billbleyer@gmail.com, I'll put you on the list, and you'll get notified about all of them. I also put everything on the Long Island History and Long Island Historical Association Facebook pages, so all my lectures and book information is posted there as well.
Yeah. I'm a member of that page on Facebook as well, so I enjoy all the info you guys put on that page. I'm a big fan of what you guys put out there, and the work that you guys do is so commendable. And I just, from my heart to your passion, thank you for you guys for what you do. Trying to preserve the history of Long Island, and I appreciate what you guys do.
Well, thank you, Matt.
Yeah, no, we'll end the show there, but we want to thank Bill Bleyer for being on Out of This World podcast. I hope, Bill, you enjoyed the interview as much as I did. I felt like I was in a history class.
Yeah, well, I can talk history, until I'm hoarse, so it's fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And I may come to one of your lectures. I may show up, and I'm gonna bring your book, and I want an autograph.
I do that.
Yeah, nice. So, you never know. That might happen. So, Well, I hope everybody enjoyed our show today. I know I did. I love history. I've learned more history doing what I do because of being in the paranormal. Like I said, I've learned so much. It amazes me how much I've retained in this little brain of mine. Because there's just so much history you learn about. And never stop learning. There's just so much like Bill said, there's stuff you never heard of, like when it comes to these small villages and hamlets that you almost never go to. And there's little stories that there's always these stories, and I think it's great. So I'm Bill. I'm just going to go ahead and play our intro here. We'll end everything here. I want to thank you again for being on Out of This World podcast. And I want to thank the audience for their questions and their input. And I really appreciate everybody being on the show today.
Thank you, Matt.
All right. Take care. Yep. So we'll end it there. We're going to play our intro here.